A big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. If you need a website or a domain, go to squarespace.com/James for 10% off your first purchase. I apologise in advance if you hear my son scream at any point. My wife has given him a bath next door, so could happen at any moment. Anyway, welcome to a video, everybody, that lots of you probably won't care about at all. Hopefully the title helps you decide whether it's relevant, but basically if you're not a Sony shooter or you don't care about gear, I completely get it. I'll see you next week. If you are, hopefully you are interested to hear the thoughts that I've compiled over the 3 months of ownership that I've had with my Sony cameras so far, and that's basically what this video is. Also, I'm aware that lots of you won't have heard a word that I've said yet because you're trying to work out if any of those photos are wonky. And the answer is yes. Yes, several of them are. That's kind of a temporary solution for them. I was basically just testing, see what they look like there. I will straighten them, I promise. Anyway, enough of the pointless waffle. This is a Sony A7R IV, and it's the second Sony camera that I bought. And its primary job is stills. I get some video clips with it, but for the most part, it's my stills camera. Now the camera that's filming this video is a Sony A7C, and that's the camera that I use primarily for video. It's the second camera that I used primarily for video, or the fourth, depending on how you count. So 3 months ago, my first Sony camera that I bought was a Sony A7RIV. About 2.5 weeks after that, I got another one because the mic input on the first one broke. And about 2.5 weeks after that, I got another one because the mic input on the second one broke. And about 2 weeks after that, you can see where this is going, I got the A7C. Basically decided after the third one I could see the future and what was going to happen. So yeah, that wasn't an ideal introduction into the world of Sony cameras, but ever since I've not had any hardware problems. That said, one problem I do seem to find is that when I change lenses on this, my A7R IV, I always have dust on the sensor, and I'm sensible about changing lenses. I try not to do it in exposed places. I always hold the camera down, I turn it off when I'm changing lenses, but I seem to get so much dust on this sensor that has never really been a problem for me with other cameras. Now, I'm not particularly worried about the dust itself. Dust is easy to get off a sensor one way or another. What I am worried about is water, because anywhere dust can get, water can also get. And I'm not the sort of photographer to stick a shower cap on top of a camera while it's raining. I always get weatherproof cameras, and I always trust the weatherproofing on those cameras. With this though, because of the dust, I do feel at the minute that there is a question mark. And granted, I've taken it out on really stormy days and it's been fine, but there is a bit of a worry there. Apart from that, build quality and stuff, no issues so far. Now, let's talk about menus, because menus was the only reason I was hesitant to get into this system, because I'd heard terrible things about Sony menus. The first 48 hours with my first Sony camera was horrible. A lot of the menu items don't make any sense. They might as well not be in English. They're called really weird things. They're in really strange places. I didn't enjoy that experience of setting up a camera. The thing is, after that first 48 hours, I've not really needed to use the menus on either camera that I use because I've got all the custom buttons set how I want them, and therefore I very rarely need to dig into page 64 of the 8th menu, luckily. Now, for what it's worth, I can talk you through my custom setup. Basically, C1 is APS-C crop mode on this A7R IV, and I never shoot in APS-C crop, but what I find it handy for is if I'm shooting on, say, my 16-35 lens, and I'm at 35mm, and I want to see what 50mm looks like, or roughly, then I hit C1, and immediately I get a look at what 50mm looks like, or 52mm, something like that. Now, even if I decide not to change my lens and that I want a shot that represents 52mm-ish focal length, then I won't shoot in APS-C, I'll shoot in full frame and crop in post, because that gives me so much more flexibility, just in case I actually wanted a shot that was 51 or 50 or 49mm, if you get what I mean. C2 is autofocus, so primarily I'm in expand flexible spot for my autofocus, but occasionally I mix that up. For the most part though, if I'm changing my autofocus, it's because I'm pressing this button on one of my lenses. And when I do that, I've got it set for IAF. So basically, if I'm taking a photo of a horse or a person, then the focus will immediately lock onto the horse's or the person's eye. And that's pretty cool. C3 I've got set for interval shooting. So if I want to put myself in the frame and I just want to take loads of shots, then interval shooting is fantastic for doing that. And then the bin button or the trash button, depending on where you are, I've got that set to minimum shutter speed, which I've spoken about loads before, so I won't go into it now. But yeah, that is minimum shutter speed. Unless you're in playback mode, in which case it's bin or trash. And then finally, the AEL button, auto exposure lock, I've got set for auto exposure lock, funnily enough. Basically, I find that sometimes if I'm filming at an unchangeable light, then the exposure will kind of yo-yo, and I really don't like that. So yeah, I lock the exposure quite often when I'm filming. So in short, all of that means that I very rarely need to go into the menus to change anything. Stabilisation, in short, is not as good as my Lumix cameras that I'd used previously, which I knew going in, but yeah, it's definitely not as good. And I can tell that just from video, actually, more so than I can tell with stills. And it's a tricky comparison when it comes to stills, because this has a 61 megapixel sensor and the previous cameras that I had like 20, 24 megapixels. So trying to work out how the stabilisation is working in both this and the old cameras does get a bit tricky, but with video, it's very obvious. And so yeah, even though this has 5-axis stabilisation, it's not as good as the Lumix. For a point of reference, I used to be really comfortable shooting handheld at like a 10th of a second or a 15th of a second, unless it was really windy or unless I was using like a telephoto. With the Sony, it's more like a 30th or a 40th of a second, I find, which is a price I'm willing to pay in hindsight for the extra resolution, but I wasn't sure about that at first. Turns out I love the resolution. So this isn't something that's Sony specific, really. I mean, lots of camera manufacturers now have a high resolution body. I have been amazed with it though. I was slow on the uptake of high resolution. This is the first body that I've had that's had over 24 megapixels, I think. And I was never really sold on it. I've spoken at length before about how printing, for example, is all about viewing distances, not resolution. But it is incredible to be able to capture that much detail, to be able to crop as much as you can with a body like this, and to be able to retain so much detail and so much dynamic range, despite the fact that there are so many pixels in here. Big fan of the high resolution. And as I say, it might be resolution that's contributing quite a lot to having to up my shutter speeds, my minimum shutter speeds. But to be honest, and I can't really believe I'm saying this, I'm happy to get the tripod out a little bit more if it means that I can use the high resolution. So autofocus really was probably the main reason that I got into Sony cameras. I mean, when it comes to video, the autofocus is incredible. I absolutely love it. And yes, some of the lenses that I own, including this 20mm, have quite heavy focus breathing, and that's not ideal. But ultimately, I'm not making Hollywood films here, I'm making YouTube videos. And being able to focus immediately while I'm filming on my own makes things so much easier and so much less frustrating when you get home to find that half of your clips are out of focus. That doesn't happen with these cameras, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. And that alone is worth the price of admission after changing from the Lumix cameras that I had before. And I still love those cameras, but the autofocus, particularly in video, makes such a huge difference to me. And last of all, ergonomics, which leaves a little bit to be desired on the A7C. I mean, it's a tiny camera, it's got a full frame sensor, something's got to give. Not a massive problem for me really, because that camera lives its life on a tripod because I'm always just filming on it. With this, the ergonomics, I think, are pretty good. And ergonomics is a big thing for me. Cameras are designed to be held, and therefore they need to be comfortable, the buttons need to be in the right place, and since I need to make use of all the buttons because I don't want to go anywhere near the menu system, it helps that I'm able to get to them really easily. One point of ergonomics I don't like with the A7R Mark IV is that on the exposure dial, there's like a click up and click down thing to lock it and unlock it, whereas on the mode dial, you've got to push the button down to turn it. I don't understand why these two things are different. Why can't they just be the same? That's an added complication that just feels a bit strange to me. Also, another point of ergonomics, this time for the lenses. Lots of the lenses that I have or have used have aperture rings. I don't know if you can see that. And they can click, or you can turn the click off, which is handy for video. Now, I think these are great, except for the fact that I normally always leave them on A, which I assume means automatic. And that's just because I like to change the exposure with the dials. The problem I find with these is that they very easily click from A to f22. So if you take the camera out the bag and you just want to take a quick snapshot, maybe there's something happening in the scene, you just need to grab a shot. Quite often I find that I've ended up having to get that shot at f18 or something, and my ISO has been through the roof. So I'd quite like to find a way, other than super glue, to just lock these lenses onto A. Anyway, yes, there are some initial thoughts on Sony ownership. Overall, so far, quite impressed. Is there anything else? I would like some more touchscreen functionality, actually. The touchscreen functionality on this is basically non-existent. And you can touch to focus on the A7C, but apart from that, you can't really do anything. I think that's about it. Battery life, very good too. Anyway, a big thank you for watching this video, and a huge thank you to the sponsor of this week's video, Squarespace. So as many of you know by now, I've used Squarespace for years. First of all, I just picked a photography template and I started using it to showcase my images online. And then a few years later, as my YouTube channel grew, I started using it as an online store as well. And for someone like me, who hasn't got a clue about coding, wouldn't know where to start with building a website from scratch, Squarespace is fantastic. And there's lots of drag and drop. There are sliders for things like text size. You don't have to worry about things like image resizing. It's all automatic. It is super simple to use. So if you would like to show off your images or your work online, or perhaps you'd like an online store, or you'd like to send newsletters out, then definitely check out Squarespace. And you can do so by going to squarespace.com to start a free trial. And after that, if you'd like to make a purchase, then go to squarespace.com/James and you'll get 10% off that first purchase. And I'll see you next week when hopefully we'll be up to no good, back outside again, taking photos. With my Sony cameras that I quite like. Hopefully not in the rain, but if they are in the rain, it should be fine. I think it'll be fine. Hopefully not in the dust.